So this comes from Bloomberg. I think it's a bit, to be honest, a bit sensationalist. I highly doubt this is going to, as it says, trigger the next civil war. Um, but it makes some good points, and it's mainly looking at history to see, you know, what happened. And I like history, so this is what we're doing today, and it is a Friday. So, will Brexit trigger the nation's next civil war? A history lesson from the from the counties scarred by the 17th century conflict. So, at the outbreak of the English Civil War in 1642, Warwick Castle was attacked by soldiers loyal to the king who tried without success to unseat the parliamentary forces that held it. With a minor skirmish, the outcome would foreshadow the broader struggle for the country. Today, the town of Warwick is under siege of another kind, one that may similarly divide, where the divided nation is healed after an escalation in the political drama over Brexit. The UK is witnessing a historic period of upheaval that has invited comparisons with events almost 400 years ago. Parliament has been suspended illegally. A court in Scotland ruled on Wednesday. The Prime Minister is threatening to flout the law to get his way, while lawmakers on all sides are in open revolt, and Ireland's future, north and south, is at stake. Even the Queen has become embroiled in the standoff, and violence is brewing, with scuffles outside Parliament last week and a government document warning of public disorder from food to fuel shortages should the country crash out of the European Union without a deal. Lawmakers this week channeled an event from the run up to the Civil War in the House of Commons to protest the so-called purgation of the legislature. Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage, one of the main architects of the vote to leave the EU, has described the present constitutional crisis as the worst period since the tumultuous period. A tour last week through some of the English countries scarred by the conflict suggests he might be right. With positions hardening and no obvious release for rising tensions, it's anybody's guess where the Brexit dilemma ends. Voters in Warwick opposed leaving the EU, seeing the departure as a threat to the key employer, the automotive industry, and to the university's town international outlook. But as the pro-EU bastion aimed at in a sea of Brexit territory, Warwick is at odds with the neighbouring districts. The UK as a whole and the Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Conservative government, those same divisions run through the swathes of the country. If we get out of the current impasse without shots being fired, we'll be doing better than I expected, said Diane Purkis, author of The English Civil War, A People's History, and the Professor of English Literature at Oxford University. The question from here is whether we can, at the last minute and the 11th hour, muddle together some kind of final British compromise. With this timber... Oh, go away. With its timber-framed houses, the country parks, and association with William Shakespeare, the county of Warwickshire is the picture postcard of England. But beneath the veneer of old-world charm lie the stark divisions in attitude to Brexit. Of course, the UK has always diverged along political lines, from Thatcherism to Blairism. What attracts today's comparisons with the 17th century is the constitutional chaos on top. Then the country chooses sides as Parliament and Oliver Cromwell's Puritans asserted authority over King Charles I and his Catholic household in a standoff over religion and power that ultimately led to war and regicide. In an echo of the Brexit patchwork of Leave and Remain, voting areas and the Civil War cleave along the lines of individual towns and cities depending on which way they're declared, for Parliament or for the King. Indeed, the political map of the Brexit vote resembled the distribution of support for both sides in the Civil War. Stephen Colling, a professor of the London School of Economics, wrote in March last year. In Warwickshire, Stratford-upon-Avon was sandwiched between parliamentarian and royalist forces. It took in casualties from the war's first major battle at Edge Hill. Stafford, Shakespeare's Shakespeare's birthplace is a 20-minute drive from the southwest of Warwickshire, but in a different world, its Brexit outlook, whereas Warwick and its surroundings are home to workers from the nearby Jaguar Land Rover plants and the left-leaning pro-European students and academics from Warwick University. Salford relies on tourism, the hospitality industry, and foreign workers to staff it. Warwick voted 59 to 41% in favour of remaining in the EU. Stafford, however, voted 52 to 84 to leave, bang in line with the country as a whole. Warwick is an isolated island of remain amid a sea of leave. Walking around Stafford, past the Tudor houses and the boats on the River Avon, there is little outward evidence of tension. There is no comfort to Sophie Curzon, an artist and author originally from Denmark who first came to Britain as an art student more than 20 years ago. For Curzon, the sense of indifference cannot be exhausted at any amount of Brexit fatigue, and this is the most worrying aspect of all. People switch off, they don't care, and that's really dangerous, he said. People say they just want Brexit over with, but I don't think it will ever end, said Clausen, because if it does happen, the divisions will get even deeper, and people who voted to leave will be even more angry, she said. No one knows the way out anymore. Johnson has a little over a month to try and strike a new deal with the EU's that's palatable enough for parliamentarians to enable Britain to leave the bloc in an orderly way on the 31st of October. If he fails to do so, he is now required by law to ask for an extension, something that will almost inevitably lead to a general election. He wants to break the impasse. Comparisons, shall we say, between Johnson and Charles I over the treatment of Parliament are unhelpful, according to Perkis. The Civil War author, whose king waited 11 years to recall the legislature rather than the present 5 weeks. Yet there is a more common, persistent, ongoing failure of compromise that contributed to the descent into conflict, she said. Which is one of the things we've actually said since the beginning. There is a distinct lack of compromise. And here's the thing. You might have won, Brexiteers, but you won by a very slim margin. You cannot unanimously say that you had a comfortable win. You won by approximately 2%. And that 2% of what we can know and what we now know was won very dishonestly by very dishonest means. So how can you say that you won clearly and outrightly and fairly? You can't. And not only that, your side should be the one reaching out to Remainers to try and, get them to come on board with you, to try and get them to, there should be some compromise. But at no point has the Brexit side ever reached out to try and compromise. Other parallels lie in the existence of the current crisis, the three kingdoms of England, Ireland and Scotland, and in the emergent print media's alarmist headlines that mirror today's social media post, weaponising fear-mongering, said Perkis. I don't think people are taking this threat seriously enough, she said in an interview to Caleb College in Oxford. 1 block away is St Giles's Church, in which carries a plaque describing its damage in the Civil War. At root, Brexit is a symptom of a crisis of parliamentary democracy, with both main parties pushed to extremes and the middle ground erased, eroding the willingness to reach consensus. This presents a challenge for politicians like Jack Relkin, selected to contest the Warwick and Leamington constituency for the Conservatives at the next election. The district was held by the Conservatives for much of the 20th century, falling to Labour in 1997 as the Blair government came to power, and has changed hands between the two parties since. Matt Weston retook it for Labour in 2017, with a majority of just 1,200 votes. His pro-European views were reinforced in a previous life as a marketing manager. Ooh, go away. Where is it? Yeah, well. His pro-European views were reinforced by a previous life as a marketing manager for the French car maker Peugeot. In places like Vienna and Paris, Bridging the division is very hard because both sides of the debate are becoming quite entrenched in their view, said Weston. I am really alarmed about what's going on in society, he said. To win the seat from Labour, Rankin, who voted for Brexit, will have to appeal to a strongly anti-Brexit electorate. He said that his experience on voter doorsteps shows the overwhelming majority are fundamentally Democrats and just want to get on with it. The divisions are not as deep as commonly presented, he said in an email response to questions, and healing the Conservative rift won't happen until we deliver what we said we would. He said that the future is bright regardless of how Brexit plays out. But that may be wishful thinking. Jaguar Land Rover CEO Ralph Steth warned last year that a Brexit could put tens of thousands of jobs at risk, and Warwick University's Vice-Chancellor Stuart Croft has called Brexit a disaster and has said that losing access to international research networks could shut down the UK out of the science vanguard and risk jobs. The warnings were not lost on Barry Archer, a maker of clay molds used in car industry design who has worked across Europe, most recently for Skoda in the Czech Republic. He was at a Stop the Coup demonstration last week in Coventry, a city whose outskirts include Warwick University's lefty campus, to protest the prolonging of Parliament. Archer was amongst the 200 or so who showed up. His latest job was cancelled as a result of the uncertainty over Brexit. His two adult sons fear their future is being settled without their say, with freedom of movement set to go in the name of the will of the people. For Archer, Brexit is personal. His wife is German, but he still doesn't see any chance to roll it back. The problem is it's divided the country so much there is not going to be an easy way around it, he said. As the autumn wind blew in the city of Fairgate, damaged the foundation of who we are and what we have done, it's just damage control now. Barnard Capp, the professor of history at Warwick, has seen the university development from its earliest days in the 1960s and still teaches a class on radicalism and the English Civil War. He sees parallels with the sort of polarisation witnessed between 1640 and 1642, when the war broke out, and says that there's a cause for concern. During the Civil War, Coventry was a parliamentary centre, known for its extensive medieval city walls. Capp related that Charles I arrived in late summer of 1642 on his way to raise an army, and demanded entrance. The mayor of Coventry refused, the first real act of defiance before the fighting started. We should all be very wary because nobody wanted a civil war. Nobody expected a civil war, and look where that happened. But even at the war's end, no one thought there would be a revolution and that the king would get his head chopped off, and yet that's where it's ended up, he said. So no one knows what the final destination will be once you get into a constitutional crisis. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Brexit in a nutshell. No one knows where we're going to end up or what's even going to happen.